Hey, welcome back to Dad Life Chess. This is Joel. It's good to be recording a YouTube video. It has been a while, but I am excited to start a little series here. I'm going to be doing some game review videos from my recent tournament this past week. I played in the 11th Central California Open here in Fresno, California, and this was my first over the board rated tournament game since February of 2020. I played in a tournament in San Francisco at the Mechanics Institute in February of 2020, and here we are well over a year later. It was awesome to get back to over the board chess, and I'm already looking forward to my next tournament. But anyway, round one, I played in the 2-day schedule. There was a 3 or a 2-day schedule that you could choose from. My schedule really didn't allow me to play Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This one, I just played Saturday and Sunday. That meant my first 2 games on Saturday were shorter time controls. This game and round 2 game were both game 60 with 10-second delay, game 60 with 10-second delay. And so round 1, I was paired against an 11-year-old kid, and his name was Sudeep, really nice kid. We actually were able to analyze the game afterwards. He is incredibly talented, and his rating has not caught up with his skill for sure. He has a great future in chess, but I was like, oh dear, here we go. I'm gonna get paired against an 11-year-old kid, and it's gonna be rough. But my opponent played d4, and I responded d5. I was expecting something like maybe a Slav or maybe a London system. I didn't expect this. So my opponent plays knight c3, and I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. I'm not too familiar with the Jabava London. I'm really not familiar with the Verisov attack. So I just played knight f6, and my opponent played bishop f4. After he played that, I thought to myself, I wonder what I would have done if he would have played bishop g5, because quite honestly, I'm not really, I don't know a lot of the theory in the Verisov, so I guess I was kind of happy about this. I ended up playing c6. This is recommended in Grandmaster Alex Koyovic's Chepaninko Slav repertoire. The idea is to kind of stop any of this weird knight b5 action and just kind of put a stop there. And it's also kind of a waiting move because you really want to develop your bishop out of the pawn chain. But I don't mind this, I guess, opening scheme. I didn't want to get like super tactical or do anything crazy. I just wanted to have a solid game and to see what we can do from there. My opponent blitzed out the move e3. I ended up playing bishop f5. Then my opponent played f3. Obviously, his idea is to play g4, h4, h5, and just kind of trap my bishop over here. And so I just played h5, stopping g4. And then my opponent quickly played bishop d3. I should note at this point, up until this point, my opponent is really just blitzing out his move. He knew his openings really well. And I was trying to take time every move to not just make the most impulsive move, but kind of think about it. I told myself going into this tournament, I really wanted to, I had been playing a lot of blitz, a lot of rapid, and I didn't want those bad habits to find its way over the board. So I said, whenever you find a good move, stop, think, ask, checks, captures, and threats, all those things that we're supposed to do. And, but my opponent blitzed out these moves, and right here is kind of where I honestly was out of book. I mean, here we're still in the opening. I thought, well, I don't really want to back up my bishop in this position because this just looks horrific. As you can see, the bar is basically saying it's time for you to go home. And this would just be atrocious. So I thought, well, I could leave my bishop here and play this, but this just did not seem good at all. So even though I didn't really want to develop my opponent's queen, I said, okay, best thing to do is just takes, and according to the computer kind of agrees with that. So I played e6. My opponent played knight ge2, and still at this point, my opponent is just blitzing out the moves. And I'm trying to think through like what's my best move in these kind of positions. And I knew I didn't really want to castle kingside, but I thought I kind of considered bishop d6 in this position, but if my opponent, you know, obliges and just basically trades off, I would like this. But I thought if I put my bishop here and I exchange, my opponent's going to basically develop their knight, and they really want their knight on f4 anyway. And even after the game, my opponent confirmed that as we were talking about the game. So I decided I'm just going to play bishop. I'm sorry, I decided with knight b d7 here in this position. And then my opponent played kind of an interesting move. My opponent played a3. And after the game, my opponent basically explained they wanted to stop. He wanted to stop bishop b4, pinning the knight to the king. I don't know if I was really planning on playing that. Maybe it is a good move. I'm not sure. At this point, I thought, okay, maybe he's just trying to wait to see where I'm going to go with my king. I just played bishop e7, and then my opponent castled. Now, at this point, actually, I was a little bit surprised. I didn't expect my opponent to castle queenside, and I thought they might try to break in the center with e4. So here we are, and really here and for the next few moves, I kind of lose the thread of this kind of position. I ended up playing queen a5. I thought I'm going to get my queen over here. I'm going to do some things like maybe expand on the queen side, perhaps just castle. And the computer, though, after looking at this game and really just even looking at it, just look at it right here. What kind of screams out to be played is an immediate b5. And now white can then try to break in the center, but really black is able to just really get the pawns storming on the queen side, and so things like this are a possibility. But it's definitely a double-edged game. Looking at this position, the computer evaluates it a little bit better for black, but this is the kind of game that anybody can win. Basically, who's going to get to the opponent's king faster? Very double-edged, kind of an unclear game. But instead, I played queen a5, and my opponent very quickly responded with king b1. And here I make a mistake, I think, kind of a dubious move. I castle queenside. And now looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. I really don't know what I was thinking. There was no rush to castle. I could have still pushed, b5, b4, trying to break open the king side, cause some weaknesses, maybe get an attack on white's king, but I ended up castling. And as soon as I castled, and here's kind of like that you calculate something, you think it through, and then you see the position on the board, and you're like, oh, wow, this is really not the greatest position for my king. I mean, basically, my king can't go anywhere because this bishop's like a beast. I'm like, this is not great. As soon as I castled, my opponent played e4. I'm pretty sure up until this point, my opponent had maybe seen this position because my opponent was playing rather quickly. They slowed down a little bit later, but my opponent kind of slowed down. Now, I was thinking, okay, they're going to if they play e5, my knight's going to be kind of stuck, kind of around. So I thought, okay, I'm going to move. I'm going to kind of reroute my knight over into this square. So I played knight b6. Now, these moves are not the best moves. As you can kind of see, the computer favors white in this position. I'm not playing incredibly accurate. I have an idea. I want to get my pieces over to the queen side, try to get an attack on on my opponent's king. But it's a little slow. It's a little sluggish. It's not really coming together really well. Now, my opponent then plays e5. And quite honestly, I was very surprised with this move. I was thinking to myself, that just doesn't make sense. you're locking up the center, taking away all the tension, forcing my knight to the square that ultimately he wants to go to. And this bishop is kind of like entombed into with these dark squared pawns. And so I was a little bit surprised. I kind of had a good feeling. I thought, well, I think I have a decent, position out of the opening. And even the computer would agree. Now, going back in the game, my opponent missed a very strong move right now is bishop d2, x-raying my queen. And really the only move that I have is to play queen a6. And then after a sequence like this, these are the computer's best moves or suggested moves, is you have a situation like this where with these doubled pawns and this pawn structure, white definitely has more space, has the ability to expand on the king side. White's game is much easier to play and would have had a better position. Luckily for me, my opponent didn't see that, and my opponent played e5. So I ended up playing knight fd7, which was where I wanted my knight to go anyway. My opponent then plays bishop to d2. Now this is a mistake. It's kind of an inaccuracy a little bit. I play knight c4. This is the best move in the position. Now my opponent then makes a gross blunder, but what's better than one blunder is two blunders. So my opponent plays, which right after I played knight c4, I asked myself, I said, well, what happens if he plays here, discovering the attack on my queen? Am I forced to take with check and he can take back? And as soon as I was thinking that, my opponent played knight e4. Now, look at that evaluation bar. Unfortunately, during an over-the-board tournament game, you don't get in an evaluation bar. You don't get somebody coming up to you and say, hey, just to let you know, you have a really great tactic in this position. So this is a blunder. Knight e4 is a blunder. And if you would like to try to find black's best move in this position, interestingly, when I analyzed the game after with my opponent, we both thought that in this position I could play something like queen b6. Now, however, it's still good. It's not the best, and I'll explain why. Because my opponent can then play queen b3, takes, and then knight takes e5, then d takes e5, and then d takes e4, f takes e4, and with these doubled pawns, I'm up a pawn, and white's pawn structure is shot. So black is doing very well in this position. However, there is even a better move when my opponent played knight e4. The best move in this position is queen b5. Look at this move. Now, I did not play this in the game. I ended up playing the lame sauce move, which we will get to in just a moment. But this move literally wins everything. Okay, there's a threat for mate. This guy is on pre. If he comes back, that is checkmate. I can't do that. Queen b5. Let's say he pushes here. I can simply take here with check. King b here. Queen takes. C takes. I can take on e4. There's the king cannot take back because the knight is guarded with the bishop, and everything's falling apart. Now, queen b5 is the killer move. There's so many threats here. There's takes here, there's takes here, there's mate threats. This is hanging. Basically, it's lights out. Stockfish gives it a -5 right off the bat. And this is just winning. Now, unfortunately, when my opponent played knight e4, I thought to myself, oh my, I have to do something about this attack here. This knight's coming in here. I didn't want to have to deal with that. So I just played knight takes d2 check. And look at that evaluation bar. Completely missed opportunity. My opponent takes back, and now we kind of have an equal game. So at this point, I thought, okay, I have potential on the queen side. I can maybe figure out a way to attack my opponent. I'm just going to go ahead and sidestep my king. I got my king into safety, played king b8. My opponent played knight b3, obviously attacking my queen. I played queen b6. Now, my opponent thought for a little bit and then played f4. Right here, I started to think to myself, oh boy, my opponent is going to start getting his pawns rolling on the king side, and I don't have a lot of breaks. I have the c5 break, and I'm not really seeing what I should do. Now, c5 is a decent move, and that's what I ended up playing in this position. But I kind of missed a key idea, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I played c5, trying to break in the center, break here the pawn chain, and my opponent played d takes c5, and then I took back with the bishop. I would invite this kind of position. I want my knight here. Anyway, my opponent was smarter than that, decided not to, and my opponent ended up playing knight c3. His idea, of course, is to play knight a4, kind of forking my queen and my bishop. So I drop my bishop back. Okay, drop my bishop back to e7. Then my opponent played here, rook h to e1, and I wish I would have thought this through when I was in this position, because I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to get my rooks to this open file, and then if he pushes here, I'm going to attack his pawn on e5. Well, I played rook c8, and then he played f5, and I was surprised. But this was kind of the turning point in the game for me. I started to feel that momentum shift. I don't know if you've played over the board games and you kind of feel that shift where I felt like I was in the driver's seat, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, my opponent's breaking through in this position. And here, the computer gives interesting moves. There's actually a weird computer draw line that can happen, and I went through it, and it just like none of it made sense. So none of that made sense. After the game, when I was analyzing with my opponent, I said, I really wish I would have played a6 here. Now, the computer doesn't think it's like an amazing move. They say, analyzing this game, knowing the direction of the game went, I needed to stop this knight coming into b5. Then I could drop my queen back to c7, attacking this pawn like I did in the game. Now, the computer throws out a lot of different moves, and this is kind of position that here I am, kind of a club level player. I'm not a grandmaster. I'm not a master by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't think I can find these kind of computerish stockfish moves in my own game. So I played a very bad move in this position. I played queen c7. Now, the reason why I say it's so bad is it allowed my opponent to really get a lot of counterplay. Now, with best play, if I was stockfish, I could have probably, held my ground, but my opponent played very well, and I did not respond incredibly well. My opponent then plays knight d4. I'm sorry, my opponent plays, yes, my opponent played, am I remembering this correctly? Oh, no, my opponent first took here, took the pawn and solidified my structure, and then my opponent played knight b5. It was right here I realized, okay, I'm in some trouble. My opponent's going to get his knight here. This pawn is a weakness. He's basically stopped my blocking my pawns with his knight. Perfect position. So here again, that if I had that a6 move in, I would have been able to stop the knight b5 move. This is bad. So I play queen b6, and my opponent plays the knight back to d5, knight 5 to d4. And here I play rook h to f8. Now, this is a mistake according to the computer. But right here, when my opponent got his knight in here, I thought this pawn is going to be under attack, and I've got to get some kind of activity. Now, in this position, Stockfish says knight c5 is the best move, then queen g6, attacking here. Then I can play g5, and I'm holding. And I missed that. I missed that move, knight c5. I think this would have been a much better move. I could almost see my opponent taking, and then I could take back something like this. This is really good for me, knocking the knight off of the square or exchanging off, and I feel like it's an even game. Unfortunately, I played rook h to f8, and I wanted to get some activity on this file. My opponent, and as soon as I played this move, I looked and I saw this move, queen g6. Wow. My position is falling apart. This is attacked. This is attacked. These two pieces are completely unprotected. And so I thought to myself, this is not good. And it was at this point in the game where I thought to myself, I'm going to lose. I'm losing to this 11-year-old kid. It's my first time over the board, in a long time. And I thought, well, this is rough. So I thought, well, I'm going to try for some kind of activity. I'm going to get my rook here to this open file. Now, I expected my opponent to take here. I did not expect my opponent to play queen takes g7. Now, look at that evaluation bar. Okay, when my opponent played queen g7, I thought my game is over. If I did not have this resource available, this is over. I mean, the number 2 move is completely losing, and the number 2 move is queen d8. Everything is falling. Queen d8, and then rook can stop rook d2. This pawn is going to be a nightmare. Things are bad. Things are bad in my camp. So I thought, well, this is just horrible. I thought of moves like rook e8, but still, everything's passive. It's just bad. This is just a bad position. I was kind of discouraged, and I looked at the board, and I saw something. I thought, I think I see a tactic. It was one of those moments where I was like, I have no idea if this works. And the move I was looking at was rook takes c2. Now, you got to understand, you're playing over the board. It's a stressful game. You're playing the first time. There's a lot of these emotions that are happening. So I saw this move, rook takes c2, and I thought, I don't know if this works. So I got up off the board. I stood up and I started walking around, and I'm like psyching myself out. I'm like, okay, this game is either I'm losing this game, or I'm going to play this move, and it's going to be a Hail Mary, and we're going to try it. I did not know, and I didn't know even until I looked at a computer like later that day, whether or not this was correct. Come to find out, this move, rook takes c2, double exclamation point. This is the only move that wins for black. Come to find out, this queen g7 was a huge blunder. My opponent had, in this position, my opponent had to play rook e3, actually, is the move. Hard to find. Rook to e3. I would have had to play rook f to f8. Had to come back here. These are all kind of computerish moves. And then my opponent can take here, and my opponent is winning this position. But after my opponent played queen g7, I thought through. I played this move. I thought, I don't even know if it's right. My opponent looked super confused. saw kind of what I was coming from, and everything loses in this position. But my opponent played knight takes c2. I then played queen takes b3, threatening the knight, then checkmate. My opponent blocks rook c1. I take bishop takes a3, threatening checkmate again. My opponent throws in a spike check. I have to block, but my opponent, I think, was hoping that I would do something like moving my king, which would be a nightmare. I did not fall for that. I ended up playing knight at f8, one last piece to block. Nowhere, no, you can't stop him checkmate unless he gives up up his queen. So he takes here. I take back with my bishop. My opponent plays rook e3, attacking my queen, and obviously defended by the knight. I just played queen b6. Moves like this are coming, and my opponent resigned. This move right here, rook takes c2, was probably one of the coolest moves I was able to play over the board, and I was able to basically swindle a win. I would call this one of my better swindles over the board, because I was losing. I was kind of lost, actually. My opponent definitely outplayed me. Got lucky. Who said there's no luck in chess? And just to go back here, we analyzed this with my opponent. I analyzed this, but really everything loses. Queen takes here, same thing. I can take here, check. King here. I can play queen c7, check here. Okay, that's the key move, is queen c7, check. My opponent could play something like knight c5. Queen takes c5, knight takes. Everything's falling here, coming in. It's completely winning for black. That's a little bit difficult to see all of those continuations. That might have been my opponent's best move, is to take here, take on e7. The other option would have been something like rook e2, but then I can just take probably either one. I can take here, and then queen takes, and then I have the same kind of position. But he goes here, and then queen c7 check. Same kind of idea. My opponent, thankfully for me, kind of played right into the fastest way to win that game, and he took my sacrifice. Knight takes c2, and I was able to play this move, and my opponent blocked. I took here, threatening mate. He checks. He can't force me into that file, because if he forces me in there, then it's over. Able to play knight f8, and he takes here, drops back, and my opponent resigns. So that was game one of this tournament. After that game, my heart was just pounding. I was like, whoa, that was quite an intense game. Able to analyze with my opponent after. Super nice kid. Like I said, incredibly talented, and has a bright future ahead of him. I was able to get a win off of him before he turns into the next master, and I won't be able to touch it for the rest of my life. But anyway, that was round one. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or have any suggestions or anything like that, let me know in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe to this channel. That way you can kind of stay up to date with the videos that we put out here, and it helps out our channel as we hope to grow it. So thanks for watching. Dad Life Chess will be back with round two next time.